to The Independent Musician. Our weekly podcast will focus on the independent artist and the music market at large. You'll hear from those artists as well as music execs, tech experts, and marketing leaders from around the globe. We'll discuss what it takes to make it in the biz and how you can overcome obstacles as you progress your craft, all the while making it interesting and fun. Now, here's your host, Mark Skoda.
Hey, this is Mark Skoda with The Independent Musician. This is our inaugural podcast, and I've got a very special guest today who's decided to join me. He is also co-founder of Iron Gate Records, a longtime fantastic drummer, musician, currently with Three Doors Down. That is Mr. Greg Upchurch. Greg, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me as your inaugural guest. I'm honored. Thank you.
I appreciate you joining us. You know, this is actually a love of mine for many, many years. I've always done interviews on radio in the past, and frankly, launching this podcast really is about sharing experiences with all these independent musicians that are out there. As you know, we've formed the record label together, and we've got a lot of folks who are trying to make it in the biz. So I thought, gosh, why not have the guy who's been through the good, the bad, and the ugly, as well as the good again, so to speak, join us for this interview. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your sort of trek to stardom, Greg?
Well, I'll put about, I guess, 30 years in a nutshell, in a little package. Well, I grew up in Oklahoma in a small town, middle of nowhere, and but I was always dreamed of being a musician and stuck in a town that, you know, was an hour and a half from everything. So it was difficult. So I had to move, and I moved to Los Angeles pretty much right out of high school. I didn't have a band. Like I wanted to move out there with a band, but I was the only one that wanted to go or was willing to go, I guess I should say. So I was out there by myself hunting and networking, hustling, whatever you want to call it, getting, you know, trying to be in Hollywood. And I actually ended up hooking up with a band, working at a Guitar Center on Sunset Boulevard. And we immediately pretty much opened up for Soundgarden. And this is in 95, 96. And from then on, it's been a crazy journey. I've played with that band was called 11, and then we became Chris Cornell's band after Soundgarden broke up.
Oh wow!
Yeah, and we played that, and then we were actually going to form a band with Chris Cornell as our singer. We were in the process of thinking of names and kind of like just spitballing, you know, different names. And I've called all my friends and told them, I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to be in a band with Chris Cornell. Oh my God. And then Audio Slave happened, and it just crushed us.
So he went on basically to stardom and left you guys behind for the moment. I mean, sometimes that's the way it goes, right? The sort of the voice, so to speak, takes their shot, and that's, I think, one of the challenges for bands generally. But obviously, you picked yourself back up after that. I think it's kind of interesting. You go from Guitar Center and a retail channel and sort of build a relationship with some buddies and form a band, and then things are looking up and suddenly they're looking down. What did you do after that? How did you feel?
I went back to Guitar Center and got a job again. That's the reality of the business, you know. But I obviously did not give up. But I ended up getting an audition for a band called Puddle of Mud. And at the time, nobody knew who they were. They weren't anything. But that band took off. You know, we exploded. And we did that for about 4 or 5 years, or I was in that band for 4 or 5 years, from 2000 to 2005. And it kind of became tumultuous, I guess you'd say, with the relationships. And you know, all of a sudden you get this band from nowhere, and all of a sudden there's money and there's fame and travel, and you're exhausted, and there's a lot of things out there, and it got ugly. And we were touring with Three Doors Down and Nickelback, and I saw Three Doors Down, all the band members were married, they had kids, and I was just recently married, and my wife was pregnant, and I saw an opportunity there, as a career move.
Right.
And I mean, like I said, I moved out to LA without a band. So I'm my own manager. I'm my own janitor. I'm the CEO of Greg Upchurch Enterprises, if you will. And so I just had to make that decision what was best for me.
Well, it's kind of interesting. The Puddle of Mud, though, let me go back to that a second. You talked about the fact that they began to experience some fame, but with that fame came a whole lot of problems, right? I think you talked about in the past everything from drugs to alcoholism to, frankly, who gets what piece of the pie, right? I mean, friendships were strained.
Well, yeah, because I mean, you'll have managers pulling members aside and telling them something instead of like, it's almost as if, I'm not sure if it's intentional, but it kind of pits members against each other when managers are telling the singer one thing and then the manager's assistant's telling the bass player one thing else, and then everybody's like, it pits people to get against each other.
Right. Well, Puddle Mud's still touring today. I mean, I just know they recently played in Reno about a month ago. In fact, one of our other artists from Iron Gate actually opened for them, Split Persona, which they got the quote-unquote honor to open for them. As we find out all too often, the honor is uncompensated honors. But having said that, it was a great opportunity for them to rock the crowd, and they did a great job, as I understand. And Puddle of Mud enjoyed their work. Has Puddle of Mud changed substantially from the days you were with them?
Well, it's a completely different band. Okay. I mean, it's still the same singer. I mean, but in fairness, that's what the situation was from the beginning.
Right.
Puddle of Mud was a band he started in Kansas City, and when he came to California, he didn't have a band. So he got a record deal, but he didn't have a band. So we kind of like got together and from different people and auditioned, and it felt right, and it was great at the beginning. And I get along with them actually to this day. They get it. We all know what this is. It's a business first and foremost, but it's also what we love. And
I always talk about managing the brand, not the band, because things change, right? I was interested. I'd never heard the story that you actually opened as Puddle of Mud, not only for Three Doors Down, but also Nickelback. Nickelback is probably the most hated, overproduced band in all of America, I think. But so, Greg, I think it's kind of interesting. You pointed out that with Puddle of Mud, you were on stage with the folks at Three Doors Down and of course Nickelback, and I think it's kind of interesting as you sort of began thinking about your whole family life, how that's changing, and how you wanted to move into a relationship of a band that perhaps gave you those same benefits of faith, family, and frankly the fun that you talk about. How did you ultimately become the drummer for Three Doors Down?
It was really a coincidence is that one day we were all, after the tour was done, I happened to call the drummer for Three Doors Down at the time, Daniel Adair. We became friends, throughout the tour. And I was just, what are you up to kind of thing. And he said, oh, I guess you're calling about the gig. And I was like, what gig? He's like, yeah, I'm leaving to go join Nickelback. I was like, really?
I'll be darned.
And they were kind of, like, as the tour was going on throughout that summer, they were kind of courting him, I guess you would say. Nickelback to the drummer for Three Doors Down.
Right.
Which is, you don't want to do that, but it happened. And the thing is also Nickelback is Canadian. Daniel, drummer for Three Doors Down, is Canadian, lives in Canada.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
And the band is from Mississippi, Three Doors Down is anyway. And it seemed to work, and it kind of really where nobody was able to skip a beat. Like like everybody changed.
Yeah, no pun intended, right? Skipping the beat, so to speak. Right? Yeah, bada bing, bada boom. Exactly. Like you're supposed to do the drum thing there, aren't you? No.
Sorry, but bound. Yeah. No, but it was just a little drummer change tour thing.
Right.
But it was good.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Of course, now that was over 24, 25 years ago, right? And
no, that was 17 years ago. That was 2005.
Was it? Okay, yeah. Got it. So in 2005, then you ended up joining Three Doors Down, and of course, at that point, Three Doors Down was already a popular band. You had to sit in now, and you're the drummer. I mean, how have things moved from? Well, let me step back before I do that. When you actually started your drumming career, I think you shared a story with me once that you were basically learning on your own. I mean, you were trying to copy every drummer that you heard on other popular music. I mean, you were in a small town in Oklahoma, and there weren't a lot of drum lessons around, and so you basically began building your craft on your own, didn't you?
Pretty much, yeah. There was obviously this was before internet and all that. The only way we could do it was every once in a while I would be able to order something at a magazine's like instructional VHS tapes.
Yeah.
And I would get those, and I didn't really even have a drum set yet, but I was just watching them saying, okay, my foot does this and my right hand does this. But it just kind of came natural to me. And I think for most drummers, it does. For whatever reason, we can get it. Now,
right.
Usually it has to hit you at a young age for the most part. I mean, somebody is 18 and never played drums just doesn't get behind a set of drums and being, oh, I guess I can play these. No, it doesn't happen that way. You're either kind of born with it or kind of not, so to speak. Or at least if you're able to grow that talent, that ability that you have, if you're able to even find it, like your son, for instance. So it's just it just kind of happens.
Yeah, it was kind of funny. I mean, we talk about him all the time, and of course, for our listeners, Greg actually was my son's drum coach and is still a mentor and a good friend. But Matt, I always like to say, came out of the womb drumming. I mean, at 18 months old, his grandmother asked him what he wanted for Christmas, and he could just say drum, drum. And so she got him his first drum, and he was beating on everything. And at 9 years old, he played his first 3-hour gig at the Hard Rock Cafe in Memphis, Tennessee. It was a hoot, and he's been loving drums ever since. And you're absolutely right. It is just part of them. I see it in his own performance, and you're right. I think it's pretty cool. Of course, they're pretty particular too about drums in general and the drum sounds as well. And I'm sure you find that as a drummer. I know that you're still doing session work and writing your own music as well, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, absolutely. I mean, when it comes to the sounds, I mean, what it does is like a sound, like it's inspiration is what you're getting from the way the drum sounds. If it sounds a certain way, you'll play better just because you're inspired. You're not fighting the sound. It's like, oh, I don't like the way the snare drum sounds, but I got to play. Right. It's kind of like when everything's working and there's so much that goes into just tuning the drums, and people don't think that it means that it's just a drum. Yeah, well, not to the drummer.
Well, I mean, that's right. That's right. I mean, and if you take drums away from so much music, and particularly rock music, I mean, it's empty. I mean, the drums.
Well, it's not rock music.
That's right. I mean, it's why you dance. So how long now? You've been with Three Doors Down for 17 years, and I think you just finished up a gig over this past weekend, right?
Yeah, I got off stage about 13 hours ago or so. No, it's a little longer than that. But it was in Iowa.
Oh, right.
In Monticello, Iowa.
So obviously you toured extensively with Three Doors Down. I mean, in their heyday, you were probably on the road quite often. And you still, I think, weren't you recently on a summer tour with them?
Yeah, well, last summer we did, it was us and Cedar. And we did most of the summer. And then the year before that, we were out with Collective Soul. And this year we haven't really done any touring. We've done shows here and there, but since COVID, this year has been like everybody's on the road. Like for these shows that we had to do,
yeah,
you can barely find a tour bus. You're lucky if one of the shows I'm going to have to drive. We're getting a rental car, and I'm going to drive me and two of the guys in the band to where is it? We're doing a race in Bristol.
I'll be darned.
So, but there's no buses.
Well, that's right, because, I mean, at the time that COVID hit and everybody sort of broke down, I mean, a lot of the bus companies went out of business, right? And now everybody's trying to make their money because gigging is the only way you really make any money anymore. And the big guys are already out touring, because obviously they had a year and a half or so where they were completely down. But it's kind of funny to hear you talk about that. You got to rent a rental car and head to the next gig. That's not too different from bands starting out today, buying their van and loading it up and getting to their next gig, right? So it hasn't changed that much.
Well, no, and that's the thing is, to be honest, and I know this is going to people that are young starting out in this think I'm crazy, but that's when it's the most fun, when you're loading up the van with your buddies and you're all barely able to sleep. It's I kind of laugh about it because it's like it's okay to be broke musician in your 20s, early 20s.
Right.
That's the only time though. In your 40s and you're broke, you're just like, okay, maybe I was trying to get it. I should have thought about being an engineer. But
That's
but
right.
that's the thing. It's like it's the journey getting to where you get that is what you're building. It's your life story, your legacy. What you leave behind, and that's the most fun. Those stories that you'll have forever about a loadout in some crappy bar in Arkansas.
Right. But it's interesting. And today the music business has changed so much. Of course, we know and most musicians are independent today. They're out there honing their craft. They're out there getting their own gigs in many cases, and sort of the breakthrough opportunities are fewer and far between. My sense is that that's partly due to the fact that there's so much more music out there, and there's so many more channels for distribution. But I think it's also because at the end of the day, the business has changed substantially, and there's been a great deal of consolidation on everything from venue management to show management, et cetera, and even the big labels restricting, sort of who gets in the club. Is that sort of a fair assessment of the reality today?
Well, yeah, because for one thing with the big labels is they don't develop artists really anymore. Like back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, or whatever, they could sign a band. They could afford to have a couple of records not do so well. We can develop this artist if we believe in them.
Right.
Whereas now it's like, you got one shot, you better go. How many followers do you have? How many likes do you have? Those are the things that are, it's so more complex and complicated from somebody like me who grew up is just like, it was just a much different world in the industry. And it's developing and changing at such a rapid pace. It's like, it's a lot of work. I've met a couple of YouTubers who have like several 100,000 million follower fans or whatever that subscribe to their channels, and I listen to how much work that they have to actually do. You're like, oh my God, because they're the CEO and janitor of their brand as well, because that's what you're doing. You're building a brand. Going back to your point, I mean, that's kind of what you kind of need to do now. How many people follow your brand?
I think though, and also, I tell some of our artists and even my son and his band, the technology's changing, and you got to be technology oriented, because at the end of the day, that technology is going to provide information, data points for you. We know, for instance, that streaming isn't making you a lot of money. No, you get 1 million streams on a particular song. It's a relatively decent pay. Some made $3,000-$4,000 maybe. But the reality is that as an independent musician, you have to recognize that the ability to sort of build that fan base using social media, as much as so many people talk about it as a sewer, it's a necessary evil, and particularly beneficial if you build your fan base, build your followership. Obviously, you're absolutely correct in as much as the big labels no longer develop bands. They want somebody who's already a hit, and if you get signed and you're not already a hit or not a hit immediately, they may shelve you unless you're smart enough with a good enough lawyer. They get a no shelf clause, right? But that's just not the case anymore. I think it's interesting to me that there's so much music out there, so many people who are working to sort of make it, but their idea of making it has had to be adjusted downward, not because of their lack of talent, but frankly, just the way the industry has changed so much. And so you're managing your brand, as you talked about. You're Greg Upchurch, managing as the CEO of Greg Upchurch drummer, Greg Upchurch janitor, Greg Upchurch booking agent, right? And I think that's the key issue here. I don't think that that's a real problem, in as much as you still can make a living at this, but just perhaps not going to score the big payday that some of the groups in the 60s and 70s and 80s did.
Well, true. The payday from record sales, sure. Now, as far as venues, I'm telling you, it's what's kind of crazy to me in this new world we live in music. Not necessarily when we're playing these amphitheaters and these bigger stadiums or arenas, but when we're playing like the theaters and stuff, like 2,000 to 5,000 seats. And I'll look at the calendar of bands that are coming up to the same venue the next week or there'll be posters on the wall. I like to walk around and see. And there's so many times I'll see a band that I've never heard of, an artist I've never heard of, almost every show. And they're like, oh, they're on YouTube. They're this, they're that. These are people that are playing the same venues that we're playing that I've never heard of, but they've got, 1 million followers. And so who am I to say that you need a label to do something like that necessarily, or some big Warner Brothers label to be able to play the same venues that we're playing? And they're selling out.
Right. Well, I think, and that's why we did Iron Gate Records. Really, is it's an independent label for independent artists, and the idea is not that you are going to suddenly get a big contract and you're locked into a 3-year deal and it's a 360 deal, and if you don't pay us back, you're basically out of luck.
No, you don't want that.
Right. I mean, we're 30 days and out. You don't like us, we don't like you. That's fine. But more importantly, it's really about providing a technology architecture, and then over time allowing you and guiding the artist to sort of do the hard work. Because you're absolutely right. It's a struggle some days for me when I talk to certain artists. They're not doing social media, they're not comfortable with it, or they don't even want to do content management. But that's how you get ahead. And if you look at some of the groups that are, as you pointed out, still hitting these big venues, even though they're quote unquote not big names on major labels, they've developed a following and they've developed a fan base that in fact supports their overall efforts. And I think that's really important for the artists to understand today, whether you're with or not without a label, whether you're going it alone or finding that label that can provide infrastructure and support that you might otherwise not have yourself.
Well, the thing is there's so many ways to get foot soldiers out there. Meaning, every band I've ever seen, like young band, has always got friends or girlfriends that are close to the band that are always there at rehearsal, that are there kind of helping out, doing stuff. I'm like, why don't you have these people doing your social media instead of the band? Right. Because they're if you have somebody who's savvy in it, then they feel like they're a part of it. They're working for you, and you're getting basically free help, especially if you're like a bunch of kids. That's what how I would have done it. Like, I've had a buddy of mine, hey, can you run our Instagram and social media stuff? Just run us by, let us know before you post anything. And then have somebody that keeps an eye on that can contact these fans. I go back to a friend of mine who worked for Prince. Mm-hmm. And what he did is he had presidents of fan clubs, like a fan club in California, Los Angeles, fan club in Atlanta, a fan club in Seattle. He would have these different fan clubs. And what he would do is he would fly them all out to Paisley Park whenever he would do a new record. And he'd come out and he'd play the record for them. And then he'd fly them back home. And so they had people in Los Angeles that were going to these record stores, making sure that their Prince's shows are getting advertised, making sure his records are in the stores, making sure his posters right up in the front when you walk in. So many bands now can do that with people that throughout the country can like put out feelers. Oh, we got a fan in Spokane. Have them start pushing our stuff and have them work for us, and just be 9 times out of 10, these people just want to be close to the band. That's all they want in return.
Well, that's right. That's right. You make a very interesting point, because independent artists have to recognize they have to find those super fans, right? The people that are going to support them, because you can
those are the people that'll do it.
That's exactly right. Not only will they do it, they'll buy your merchandise, they'll buy your tickets, they'll help support you, they'll
call the radio station. Why aren't you advertising? Why aren't you putting up they're coming to town, making sure going to the venues, making sure their posters are up that they're coming next week. Those things.
Right, exactly.
I call them foot soldiers,
Indeed. And I think that's, and that isn't so unusual from the time you started out in your bands. I mean, as you get bigger and you're bigger part of a label, of course, you have those infrastructure, that infrastructure support. As you know, through Iron Gate, we offer a lot of those marketing services to help the bands move forward. Now, the reality is, you've got to spend some money. I mean, that's the other thing. I find it sort of interesting that an artist will put $3,000-$4,000 into recording 2 or 3 songs, release those songs, and then nothing after that. You have to recognize that the funds that you put into the writing and producing the song and ultimately releasing the song is only half the equation. You have to then say, what am I budgeting subsequent to that for the release? And am I doing releases every 6 to 8 weeks or 8 to 10 weeks at the very least, so that now these modern algorithms begin to identify you as a regular talent that's out there, and you get the benefit of those algorithms beginning to promote your sort of songs at the right time to the right audience.
Right. It's all about content. I mean, you have to have stuff out there. Hey, if you haven't written a song, well, do a cover song or something. You have to have something out there for people to be excited about and interested in.
Right, exactly. And I think, for the young artists that are out there, and even some of the guys that are a little bit later in life trying to make it, these same ideas are necessary regardless of where you are in your career. I think that the reality
Absolutely.
is that you need to chase your dream, and that's first and foremost. But chasing your dream requires a certain level of commitment beyond just the talent that you have. It also requires you to be a business person. We've talked a lot about this already during this show, is the idea of managing your brand. What is your brand? How are you defined? Who are you to your fans? Where are your fans? Who is your super fan? And ultimately, how do you begin to talk to them, talk with them, and how do you promote your music to them? The idea of buying streams or buying followers, those are ridiculous ideas. And there are still artists who do that. And arguably, even some of the big labels will, quote unquote, create huge amounts of streams for their major acts just because it's sort of the way it's done, unfortunately. But the reality is, as you're starting out as a young artist, you need to find those foot soldiers you speak about. You've got to find those people that are going to love you, love your music, who are there to help you and perhaps promote you on their social media as well. And when you come to town, you need to reach out to them, and you need to make an effort to identify not only who they are, but give them some sort of tender, loving care that, hey, you're grateful for their fanship, quote unquote.
Right, because we have 3 doors down at Superfans, and we know them all on a first name basis. Like, they'll come to a show and we'll give them hugs. We visit with them. I mean, one of the super fans is now friends with our singer's daddy, and they go on fishing trips. And I mean, it's crazy. And it's just like, he's done so much for the band. Like, when the 17 Days record came out, he went to the Today Show and stood out there with this big sign, making sure that he was in the window for the whole episode of the album being released.
That's wild.
Stuff like that. You know what I mean? Like, and then so when you are in town, you make sure you interact with these people, because these people will be with you, could be with you for the rest of your life if you're lucky.
Right. Right.
So
sort of turning this issue of sort of career now. I mean, obviously things have changed. The idea of sort of getting out there and, flopping on somebody's couch until you sort of make it, until you get that big break of a label, just isn't likely, or is less likely today than perhaps when you were coming up. Largely, as you point out, I think because labels are no longer developing talent, are they? They're really expecting you to come all packaged up with your social media, your music, your followership, your fans, and then they'll give you, quote unquote, that shot, and maybe help you really accelerate to the big leagues. And that is happening, right? I mean, it's happening with bands like Greta Van Fleet and the Three Sisters out of Monterrey, Mexico, The Warning. It certainly has happened in the R&B space and rap with people like Lizzo and others. And I think it's continuing to happen from time to time. Billie Eilish is another one that comes to mind. But the reality is that, they're few and far between. So you have to be able to craft your plan, execute your plan, and work it so that you go ahead and actually earn your money that is necessary for you and your band to live today yourself.
Well, the thing is it's very, very possible to do well without a label. And if you can a major label.
Right.
And if you can do that, I mean, that's the way to go, because next thing you know, they're going to be, because the thing is if you have a bunch of followers and you're busting your hump on social media and you're getting hits and all the likes and loves and all that stuff, the labels are going to come and find you.
Right.
The big labels. I mean, they got people that are looking for that all the time. Like, nobody's signed this band and they've got 4 million followers.
Yeah, exactly. But that's why we started this label. I mean, the reality is that if somebody can be independent, have own, and as you know, our model is for the artists to own their songs, to own their publishing.
That's the biggest thing right there.
That's right, to own their streaming. And let's say people ask me all the time, well, Mark, how do you guys make it big? I said, well, look, we're not getting paid a lot of money. We can make a few bucks here and there. my hope would be that one of our artists breaks big. Columbia or Warner comes to them and said, we'd like to do a co-deal with Iron Gate Records. That would make me happy for the artist. But the reality is that they may say, no, I'm going to stay independent and keep doing what I'm doing because I've already made it. I don't need you anymore. I will tell you the one exception being, I think, is what we've seen in the consolidation of venue management with, the majors that are sort of buying up all the associated venues in which major acts can play. That has been a problem, I think, to a degree in the meantime. But having said that, you still can find a lot of places to play, as you said, and more importantly, as an artist, you need to be able to maintain your freedom and maintain your intellectual property. Because as we saw recently with the likes of many of these legacy acts, they're selling their catalogs for hundreds of millions of dollars. That's where the real value gets created over a career.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the thing is, you got people like Bob Dylan selling his entire catalog.
Right.
I mean, that's quite a catalog of material. And I think he got $500 million for it.
I believe just under that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what a great little retirement gift that is. $500 million, and he can still go and write more songs and still tour.
Right.
I mean, but you see it a lot, and a lot of them see the writing on the wall. It's tough to in this day and age to have value in music that's going to last 70 years.
Yeah, and that's right. I think that's another thing I tell people. It is interesting when we look back to the 60s and 70s and 80s. There is that sort of these legacy acts are still touring. And I always ask the question, why are the legacy acts still touring? These guys are now in their 60s and 70s and even close to 80. I mean, Sir Paul McCartney on his 80th birthday did a gig in London, right? And the Rolling Stones just played in Paris, in fact, I think this past week. So why are people still going to these acts? And the answer I keep coming back with is they did great music, organic music. They played their own music, and they actually toured with their own music. And so today, if you look at a lot of music, it's overproduced. It's monotonous in some cases. Because I think the culture has changed in as much as the culture has also begun to look at music as a consumable, right? It's temporary and you get rid of it.
It's a commodity.
Right. But I think the great songs still can be written and the great songs can still be remembered 50 years on. I mean, people go back and think about some of the songs from the Beatles, even I Want to Hold Your Hand from, I think, 1963. People probably still remember that melody. I don't know that anybody's going to remember WAP at all in the next 50 years. So
no, there's no melody. It's a shock value.
Right, exactly. So I think, good artistry is really critical. I think that is one element. I think aligning yourself with the appropriate people to help you succeed is another element. Of course, the ability to sort of manage your career as a brand, not as a band per se, because bands do change, as you pointed out. And then ultimately to find those mentors and those relationships, whether it's fans or whether it's managers or other people that are going to help you succeed and who are going to be supporting your efforts. Because in the end, that support becomes critical to you when those moments are at your lowest, perhaps, and you feel, should I still be doing this, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, for sure. And the thing is for young bands, you really have to take advantage of all these people that follow you on Instagram and really reach out to them and build relationships with them. Because like I said, there's so much built-in help that you can get from these people throughout all the country that can help you, and you can build these relationships and build something, pretty special that you can do for no cost, just your time,
right?
And just being nice to people and building these fans. Because trust me, without the fans, you don't have this. You don't have any future. Really.
You've talked to me about that a lot. I mean, and in the drumming community is always like really tight because they're not the glory community, right? The lead singer or that lead guitarist, is out there out front. One thing you always used to tell, I think, Matthew, and I thought it was extremely important for any artist, frankly, is to be humble. Right, to be humble, to be kind, and to sort of engage both your bandmates and your fans in a way that demonstrates that you actually have and care about them. Being an arrogant ass is not going to be very beneficial to your career?
Well, for instance, Dave Grohl. I'll just use him as an example.
Yeah.
He's probably the nicest guy in the music business. I mean, he's one of the guys that you're never going to hear a bad story about a story when he was a jerk. I've yet to hear one. The way I met him, I was in dinner one time with my wife at our sushi restaurant in Los Angeles, and we noticed that he was at the sushi bar. And he came up and he walked over to my table and he asked me, he says, "Excuse me, are you Greg Upchurch?" I'm like, "Oh my God, yeah." And so we sat and talked, and he said, "I saw you with Chris Cornell," and we got to talk and everything. But that's the kind of person he is. Most lead singer, rock stars, or whatever, just don't go up to people's tables and just like, "Hey, man, how you doing?" Like that. And so put it in perspective that he's that person, right? And do you know how hard it is to be the biggest band in the world? And he's done it twice.
Right. That's right.
So if I could just tell you, it goes a long way to keep those bridges nice and safe and easily travelable, and don't burn them. Because I'm telling you, it is so true about be nice to who you meet on the way up because you're going to meet them on your way down. Well, Dave Grohl's never had to come down because he's never burned a bridge in his life.
Indeed. Greg, as sort of we get to closing here, one of the things I thought was interesting is you've sort of built your career. I mean, you've mentored people in the business, but you're doing something pretty interesting right now, leveraging your brand and a legacy of your music, and that's actually about ready to open up a new coffee business, right?
Yeah, I got a coffee shop and we're gonna roast our own coffee, and I'm just trying to set something up that's a little different. I mean, because to me, if I'm in Three Doors Down for another 20 years, that's great. But I mean, I just want something for myself, just something to have that of my own.
Right.
But going back to like catapulting what I've done with Three Doors Down into something special, and going back to my hometown in this little bitty Oklahoma town where I grew up, and show kids that grow up there, like, dream big, kid. Because you don't know. It can happen to anybody. All you have to do is just keep going for it. Because I always tell them, the future rewards persistence. It will if you just keep going forward and just keeping a good attitude and be the person that you want to meet. Be like somebody that you would like to talk to.
Indeed. Because the race is won by those who persist. And look, I always tell people, when you're young and you're doing this, if you're in your late teens and early 20s, you've got your whole life ahead of you. If you don't chase the dream now, at that moment in time, you won't at 40, you won't at 50.
No.
So go after it, persist, keep people together, keep your band together, keep building your career, building your own music, and building that brand, as we've talked about numerous times. And then find the right relationship, whether that's an independent record label like Iron Gate, whether that's some mentor that's individual that'll help you along, or whether you decide to go it alone fully. Be persistent in your career, because in the end, that persistence will allow you to succeed. And nobody, I should say not nobody, but very few people make it overnight. And that is the issue no more so than in music, because music requires building presence, building a fan base, and then continuing to release great music on the behalf of your band or your singer-songwriter. So that is extremely good advice, and you've continued to persist in your career over these many years as well, from the moments of picking up some documents and reading about how to drum to the point of actually continuing to tour and still perform with Three Doors Down. It's a tremendous story, and now building out a new business for fun. And I should also tell everybody this is actually going to be a coffee shop focused on some of Greg's music career as well. So it's got a great vibe. I was fortunate. You sent me some pictures, folks. They're pretty cool. And yeah. I think it's going to be a neat place to go, and something maybe you ultimately could even franchise.
Well, I'd like to. I just want to create a place with like that. Like I said, it's got all my musical memorabilia in there, but I want it to be a place for songwriters. A place Indeed. Where you can like call up somebody and you're like, hey, let's meet down there and work on. You bring your acoustic guitars in and write a song in the corner.
Right.
That kind of thing. I want it to be a very camaraderie, songwriting, loving, open. Because the thing is like customers will come in there and see people writing a song. They'll think that's the coolest thing. How could it not be?
Right. As we close here, I want to take it back to a independent artist. You've worked a bit with Split Persona. They're out of Reno, Nevada. They're one of our artists we've signed. I know that you did one of their songs, and you were actually the drummer. They've given you credit for that. I mean, what do you think about these young bands now? I mean, you've heard them, you obviously like them, but what was unique about them? What did you find attractive?
Well, there are several things that I really caught my attention about them. One was their passion and love for what they were doing, which is. It got me excited. I haven't, because I guess maybe I get a little jaded, but it was just like they just loved, like, we're having such a good time in the studio. And then when I listened back to some of their other songs that they'd written, I heard more than one song that I really liked, and then I heard more than two songs that I really liked, and I was like, wait a second, how old is this guy again? I mean, and I'm like, if he's doing this now at this age, I'm like, I can't wait to see what they're going to come up with, So, I mean, I just got excited about them, and I mean, they were just such good kids, and I felt the energy that was, I don't know, addictive. It felt like I couldn't be the only person. There's got to be tons of kids that are going to love this band.
Well, they're doing a great job. They're doing a lot of touring now, and they're
working.
They're working real hard. They
exactly.
They got themselves a van. They are, sleeping in it when they have to. I mean, I go back to some of the old documentaries about the Eagles and other bands, and they were basically flopping on people's couches and living off, $50 a week, and it's not too different in that respect today. But they're committed, and I think what's interesting is Xander Hoshak, who's their lead singer, is just a young guy. He's just 19, and one of the things people have to understand is, their chops aren't even really building until they're in their 20s. I mean, and they're already being successful. And I think that's the other thing about persistence, right? Start early, focus your time, build your craft, and then ultimately you mature in it. Because when you're in your 20s, mid-20s, at that point in time, things have matured, your voice has matured, your music style has matured, and you probably have a greater chance of being successful. So I think they're a good example of that. And certainly I'm doing the same thing, mentoring my son's band, Skoda, which is, a bunch of young guys as well. They're about ready to release their next 7-song short album, and it's pretty cool. So it's fun to watch these young people produce music that, quite frankly, I enjoy listening to. And by the way, as a side note, folks, if you want to listen to some of the Iron Gate record artists, they're all on our Iron Gate Records radio. So go to IronGateRecordsRadio.com. We'll be having some apps out shortly. You can listen to the actual music produced by Iron Gate Records artists as we promote them and, of course, do this podcast as well. So, Greg, I want to say, as we sort of finish up here, any other parting thoughts you have for artists and for the business side?
Well, no, other than when you were talking about, the Split Persona guys getting in the van and doing that, getting their band van and getting their gear, and they're doing social media, they're keeping up with it. They're doing the things right. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
That's exactly what you need to be doing. It's like sacrificing. You have to prove to the universe or whatever that this is what you love and want to do. So you have to suffer a little bit. Sure, it's going to be bad, but man, it makes it, when it turns around and gets good, it makes it even better. It's just,
indeed,
enjoy the trip. I mean, and have fun with it, and don't bicker with each other over stupid crap like who bought the last Slim Jim or whatever. You know what I mean?
That's right. Well, I think to your point is that at the end of the day here, it's a journey, right? And there are going to be ups and downs, and there are going to be stories that you'll be able to tell many, many years later. And I think that's important. And so all I can say is have fun in it, enjoy it. If you love the music business, I love the music business. I love music generally. It is truly human. It is a way to move people. It is a way to move an entire audience, and nothing can be more interesting than that as an artist. So, Greg, I appreciate your time today. Thank you for helping us launch this inaugural podcast. And
I love it. Thank you.
We'll be looking forward to having you on again, but more importantly, continuing to watch you open your coffee shop. I think, as I told Greg, I'd like to launch Iron Gate Records Coffee, or just Iron Gate Coffee would be kind of cool. So maybe I'll ask you to, we'll figure out how to brew some up for these. So thank you so much, Greg. Thanks, everybody, for listening to The Independent Musician, our inaugural podcast, and we'll see you next week. Thanks again.
Thanks for joining us this week on The Independent Musician. Make sure to visit our website, IronGateRecordsRadio.com, where you can subscribe to the show on your favorite streaming platform, so you'll never miss an episode. While you're at it, if you found value in this podcast, we'd appreciate you giving us feedback or simply tell a friend about the show. Be sure to tune in next week for a new episode of The Independent Musician, where the independent musician is the star.